So first I should check and see if the mic is working. Can you hear me in the back? Needs to be louder, okay. Are the folks around to do that? We need the mic raised. I know they were having problems with that before. I think it's apparently showing up on the video cast, so you should all just go away and watch it on the video cast, but the sound doesn't seem to be showing up here. I don't know. It's on, yeah.
Do you want to try the handheld?
Well, but we also need the video cast.
I can check with the...
Yeah, okay, check with them, and meanwhile, I'll use this as well. Is that better? That's not working either. It's off, okay. But if I turn it on, does it work better? Yes, there we go. Okay, finally. Okay. Well, thank you so much for inviting me here to speak at an ungodly early hour in the morning, especially since I flew in from California yesterday. So it's, it's 5 o'clock in the morning. These are these times when I can sort of feel my lips moving, and I'm hoping something is coming out. It is true that I worked at the University of California. I worked there for 23 years on their Melville catalog, the Union catalog. And when I announced that I was going to leave the organization, go off on my own, I went to my boss and I said, I've been here for 23 years. If I'd committed murder, I would be out by now. It's time for me to go. And interestingly enough, though, I continue to think a lot about catalogs, and it's much easier to think about them when you're not trying to develop a particular one. What I'm going to talk about here today are some of the things that I see happening in the world of where we might be going with library catalogs, library cataloging, and some sort of high-level ideas of where I think we might be wanting to go. I'm going to have to go through it very quickly because I want to cover, it's hard for me to just cover part of it. I want to cover the whole thing. So I'm going to give you a high-level view, and then hopefully leave time so that there can be questions, and then I'm going to be around for the rest of the day if people want to talk about things. So I'm calling this talk today, There's No Catalog Like No Catalog. And hopefully by the time I finish, this will make sense to you, and it won't sound as bad as it did to one mailing group actually discussed the title of this talk extensively without anyone ever having seen it. So you'll actually get to know what's in it. So I want to start by pointing out a study that OCLC did in 2005, and they asked users what their perception was of the library. And amongst the things they asked them first it turned out that they asked them whether or not they used the library and whether or not they used the library catalog, and 50% of them said that they used the library catalog at least once a year. But in terms of where people start their work, they start their searches, 2% start their search at the library website. And all the rest of the searching is basically outside of the library. So this is the situation that we have, which is that our users are not beginning their work in the library catalog. And the question that I want to pose to you today is, maybe that's okay, maybe it isn't. But how do we want to define the library catalog? And is this the situation that we're really trying to fix or that we're happy with? So in order to sort of show you a little bit about how people do searching, which I'm sure you're well aware of, but I want to do a little bit of role playing. For a few minutes, I'm going to pretend to be a typical undergraduate. And I'm about to take a class, a literature class, and the professor has told me that has on the reading list Lolita. And I'm 18 years old, and I've sort of heard of Lolita, but Sue Lyon is old enough to be my grandmother at this point, right? And so I need to find out a little bit more about this book. So being an undergraduate, what do I do? Of course, the first thing I do is I go to Google. So let's see what happens when we go to Google. I find it very interesting that today when you go to Google, you aren't getting what we used to think of as being like somebody's web page about whatever, somebody's web page about Lolita. What you tend to be getting are entries into much larger information stores, such as Wikipedia, Internet Movie Database, and Amazon. These are what are coming up at the top. Well, because I am a typical undergraduate, I'm going to take the very first thing that Google suggests that I do, and that's going to be to look at Wikipedia. Wikipedia, the entry here is really interesting. It's just stunning. It goes on. You will see it is extremely lengthy. It starts out by giving you a little bit of intro at the top, some sort of basic facts. It gives you a very quick sort of resume of what's going on. If you look at the contents, the table of contents is huge. You get plot summaries. Now, we all know that this is Wikipedia, and therefore some of this might be just bunk, right? But if it is, there's definitely a lot of it. And you can see, you can look at all of the links in here. Now, some of this is hot links to other terms in Wikipedia, which I find to be not terribly interesting, but a lot of it is links to really good other information on the net. We get the real-life prototype, what Nabokov's afterward. We find out that it was done for TV and movies. We get actual references, external links. We get I find interesting all of the works of Nabokov listed at the bottom, so you learn, even though you've looked up Lolita, you find out that that isn't the only thing this person has written. And then, of course, something very key that you get in Wikipedia is you get something called edit this page. In other words, you could go ahead and edit the page. It's not just for you to read. It's not read only. It is read write. Another key thing is, and let me find some here, is every time you have an ISBN, Wikipedia links you out to an ISBN page. This ISBN page is just astonishing. It is bookstores and libraries. And what it will do is it will launch a search for you. You don't know ahead of time whether or not these folks have it. Maybe someday we will have that. But if you look here at the countries in which this will search and all the bookstores. So you have an incredibly rich set of linking out when you're using this source. So now let's go to Amazon, say that I followed one of those ISBNs and I followed the link to Amazon, or I went to Amazon and did a search. Wonderful thing, of course, with Amazon is they're trying to sell you something. I mean, there's no bones about it. Amazon's trying to sell you something. And so they're trying to, when you type in the word Lolita, and they have lots of different things that they sell, they don't know which one you're looking for. So you get the books, you get the movie, you get the shoes, the glasses, and the martini glasses, all of them being offered to you on Amazon. And when you get down to the books, you start getting a lot of information. Again, this is a very long page. It tells you, the usual, other people who bought this also bought this other thing. People have been allowed to tag it, so there's social tagging going on. There's reviews, and you can read reviews. You can see lists that people have created, other pages that people have created on Amazon about this. Quite a rich amount of data. Including someone who has decided to do an entire sort of psychoanalyzing Humbert site on Amazon itself, which I find very interesting. A more sophisticated user, and probably that means a librarian, may have gone to Library Thing. And I'm sure you've all taken a look at Library Thing, which is just a great amount of fun. One of the nice things about Library Thing is you do get a lot of the social information. So you see how many copies there are out there of Lolita. You can see when you get to the entry itself, they have been quote-unquote Ferberized. All the different versions of the work have been brought together, so you see all the titles. You see lists. The wonderful thing about Library Thing is all of this is done statistically. It's people who own this also own that, which is also what Amazon's doing, which is they're mining their data for these relationships. These aren't relationships, of course, that people have had to make. They're relationships that are inherent in the data itself. You can get, descriptions. So this is interesting that Library Thing pulls in the Amazon description. Also, we'll send you out to buy it. We'll send you out to WorldCat to find your library, and you can swap this book. And how many of you have looked at the unrecommendations on Library Thing? These are so much fun. This is, I have to do this even though I think it's probably not necessary for the talk, but it's just too much fun. So if you get the unrecommendations, which is statistically the people who own this book don't own this other book. And so the people who own Lolita do not own The Passion of Jesus Christ, 50 Reasons Why He Came to Die. The people who own Critique of Pure Reason do not own Confessions of a Shopaholic. And it goes on and on like that. Great fun to look at. Okay, so let's go back to, oops, no, that wasn't the one I wanted to go back to. There we go. So what is it that we've seen about these sites that we've just taken a quick look at? Well, I think one of the things that is really important about these sites is that all of them try to link out to every place they can imagine that you could go from wherever you're starting. That there is just an incredible amount of movement. You can kind of churn. But I happen to think that information seeking is a churning kind of activity. They also all, so there's no dead ends, which I think is very important. They also all allow user participation, sharing of information, and many of them allow you to, in some ways, grab the information and make use of it on your own through things like APIs or other ways that the data is available. Interestingly enough, most of them also link to libraries. So let's see what happens when the user follows one of those links and goes to the library. And this is what the user gets when they go to the library. This is, I'll show you two different systems. This one is an Aleph system. But you can see you get the basic bibliographic information, you get the call number, and if you can see down there, there's the status, which shows that it's either out or missing at UCLA. Go to this, I got this from my local public library. And this one, I think is excellent that at the highest level you see what, that there are copies available. And this is what I think people go to the library catalog for, and I think they get exactly what they expect. And this is good. This is very good. So we are providing the service that I think most users expect, which is at a certain point, when you've done some research and you decide, now I think I want to get something and read it or get a book from the library, we let them know, does the library have it, and is it available? Very good. But I wonder if we aren't selling ourselves short. I mean, I wonder if we really want to stop there and be that particular function. Or do we want to expand our ideas? We are now in the process of getting a new set of cataloging rules, resource description and access, RDA, that would presumably replace AACR2. And these are based on the functional requirements for bibliographic records. And the functional requirements are functional because they talk about what functions we want our bibliographic records to perform. And in particular, they talk about it in terms of user tasks. So these user tasks are the basic requirements for our records and for our catalogs. And they go like this. First, the user wants to find, so that's the search function. Then they need to identify, that is when something pops up on the screen, you need to be able to understand what it is. Out of everything that comes up on the screen, you need to be able to select the one that you're interested in, and then you want to obtain it. So I think we saw that perfectly in the Lolita example, that the search on Lolita saw that there were various, books available, select it and get it. This is a very linear and very narrow view of how people interact with information. As a matter of fact, I think this is a perfect description of the person walks up to the card catalog, opens the drawer, finds something, looks at all the different editions, decides, which one they want, write down the call number, and go to the stacks. I mean, we've made it a little bit better today because the catalog is online and we can tell people right off before they go heading off anywhere whether or not the book is on the shelf, which is a wonderful service. But look at how narrow this is. Here's a different view of information. This is from a Mellon grant in which they actually asked people in the academic environment, how do you go about looking for information? What do you do with it once you have it? So the library tends to end at, we hand the person the book as if at that point, our responsibility is over. This also has sort of four main primitives, and they are discover, gather, share, and create. So of these, probably what the library provides is a little slice in there. And it could be that same 3% slice that we see in where people begin their searching. We're providing very little of this. And yet all of this is activity that is going to make use of bibliographic information. There are citation management, annotating of documents, bookmarking, blogging, course support, sharing of file space, sharing files with colleagues. All of this makes use of bibliographic information, and in a way we have just washed our hands of it. So I'm here to suggest that the problem with the library catalog isn't that we haven't done good library catalogs, but that we have defined them in such a narrow way that we're missing out on a lot of opportunities for the library to be involved in the activities of our users. Now, one of the arguments that I always get is, well, you look at Wikipedia, you look at Amazon, they've got all this data. We don't have that data. All we have is our bibliographic data. The fact is that our bibliographic data combined is incredibly rich if we know how to pull out information and interpret it. And I think, yeah, this is in there. So have you looked at WorldCat Identities, which I think is just wonderful? WorldCat Identities is basically data mining of WorldCat. And if you think about what we have in a typical authority record about an author, there's very little there for the user. There's the author's name and some variations on the name, and that's it. Using a large bibliographic database, WorldCat Identities manages to give you a wonderful picture of who the author is. And this Vladimir Nabokov, the first thing you find out is that WorldCat has over 1,000 works in almost 3,000 publications, 39 languages, 162,000 library holdings. That immediately tells you something about the importance of this author. The thing that I really love about this is this graph that shows you how much the author published in his lifetime, how much was published after the author's death, and how much has been published about the author. And this about the author, to me, is really key. All of this, I mean, you're sitting there right now realizing that, this is subject headings, and this is authors in the catalog. Very simple. But just look at what you can do with it if you think about it, not as individual records, but as a large body of information. They're able to interpret a great number of things, the most widely held works about the author, and then you get to the most widely held works by the author, and guess what? Here's Lolita. So my 18-year-old looking at this would immediately be able to see why Lolita was on the reading list, right? I just learned through a posting of Lorcan and Dempsey's where they get this audience level, which I've wondered about. But the audience level, basically, they look at whether it's academic or public libraries that hold it. And then they develop an audience level from that, which I think is very interesting. It may not be totally accurate, but it was an interesting kind of data to pull out of the WorldCat database. Related names, tag cloud, and of course all of the wonderful pictures. Now, if you're wondering whether or not this really does tell you anything about authors, I'm going to give you two other examples. The first one being the person who I think of as poor Emily Dickinson, because it's hard to think of her any other way. This is what she published, what was published during her lifetime, down here. This is what was published after her lifetime, and we're getting up, here's 2008, should be about here. This is what is published about her. From this, just from this, you can tell that this is a vital, important author that is currently being talked about in our literary world. And, you know, you get the usual, all of the information about her. Now, in comparison, I don't know how many of you had lived through this dreadful era, but the era of Rod McEwen. Anyone remember Listen to the Worm? Okay, so here is like Rod McEwen's publications. You can go through the 60s and 70s, and then you see that a new generation is born about every 7 years, and his books get published again. But these little dots here are the works about him. And one of them is by Glenn Yarborough, so you get a sense of where this man stands in the literary canon just by looking at this. So the fact is we do have this really rich information, not perhaps in a single small library, but collectively, and we work collectively, and we are one big giant library of information that we should be able to make use of. So what are some of the issues? Why are we having such a hard time? You know, the people go to Wikipedia, they go to Google. Why isn't the library catalog in this mix? And part of the reason is the difference between being on the network and being in the network. Library catalog, we say, oh, but our library catalog's on the network. Well, there's a doorway to it on the network. There's a web page where you can get a link and you go out to the OPAC. Our data is tucked away, hidden away in databases. If we were in the network, our data would be out there, floating around the network somehow, and I'm not saying we're going to just toss all of our MARC records out there. I think we have a lot to do before we can achieve this, but our data would be out there. It would be out there floating around with all of those other sources. It would be out there so that you could link our data to Wikipedia, that you could cite our data in Amazon, that users would see these together. So I find it interesting that when Brewster Kahle of the Internet Archive decided that he wanted to create a library catalog for the Open Content Alliance, he did not at all think about creating a database. He thought of his first idea was, we want one web page per book. Well, he's Brewster, and I don't know if you've ever heard Brewster speak, but Brewster is very expansive and never does anything halfway. So the project now is to do one web page for every book ever printed, is his goal. Don't know whether they'll achieve it, but it shows a difference in thought about how you present this data in a web-based world. So you can go to the Open Library. It's demo.openlibrary.org. Put in Lolita. You get a book page. They've recently added the connection to Google Book Search that just came out this week. So you can go back and find it in Google Book Search. An interesting thing is that authors have their own pages. In library data, authors are buried in the bibliographic records because users never really see the authority record, and why would they want to see the authority record? It really doesn't have much for them to see. But like sort of the WorldCat identities, they are creating a separate page for the author. And they're talking now of creating separate pages for publishers, separate pages for series. And what does it mean? It means that you could connect this author page. In other words, you could talk about Nabokov and link to this without having to link to any particular one of his works, because now the author has his own page. And if the publisher has its own page that points to all the books, you could talk about the publisher and point to that without having to point to, you know, all of the different bibliographic entities. So this is a concept of giving each part of this bibliographic description its due and allowing it to have its own identity on the web. And all of this moves us toward this thing that is called the semantic web, which I have to admit that 4 or 5 years ago I hated and thought was really stupid, and I'm beginning to warm up to it, that conceptually the semantic web would allow us to make great connections to our bibliographic data by allowing things like an author to be pointed to on its own, or to have its own place on the web, or to have its own identity, and to be able to connect to other things. And by doing that, and by getting our data onto the web, we then hopefully become part of this whole picture, so that Wikipedia is there, and you can see Wikipedia, you can see the library, you can see WorldCat identities. All of this can be connected together, and it becomes this one big web of data, and the library is part of it. So now I'm going to run you through some stuff that's a little bit technical, but I want you to sort of know that what I see, at least, as happening that would move us forward in this area. The first thing is that we have to recognize that this is not where our users do their information seeking or even their intellectual work. This is where they do it. We can't ask them to come to the library. And the amazing thing to me about this, and this was from something that occurred to me one day when I was in the stacks at the Berkeley Library, which is, when I'm here, I have access to all kinds of great information resources. I can, if I've forgotten an author's name, I can quick Google it. I have access to databases. If I'm thinking about a journal article, or if I see a citation to one, I can Bing, I can go to it, find out where it is, and if I can get it, maybe even get it immediately online. When I'm here, I have none of that available to me. So one of the things we have to do is we have to integrate these two environments. And one of the ways that people are trying to integrate these environments is by adding more and more into the library catalog. I happen to think that we might be better off going in the other direction, which is moving our data out into the rich information resource that is this. So the next generation catalog, or cataloging, is based on some activities. One of them, and this Webify I got from, I think, from Lork and Dempsey, but is to webify library data. In other words, our library data has to get out of our catalogs, has to get out of the MARC format, it has to play well on the web, it has to be available for people to do mashups, there have to be ways that people can pull it into programs, pull it into documents. I would love for every document that has a footnote, for that footnote to be compatible, to have come from library data, be compatible with library data, and be a link to library data. And there's no reason why that footnote should be something completely separate in another world, when most of the time, where do they get the citation to begin with? From something they got from the library. We have to make library data available to other online services. I think we've been very much afraid of letting other people use our data. And one of the interesting problems that we've had, and I've been doing some consulting on with the Open Library, is getting libraries to give the Open Library their data. And one of the objections, I believe, is, well, what if they do something with it that we don't like? And I say, they will do something with it that you don't like. It's guaranteed. But that's what it means to get your data out there. That's what being out there on the web is about. You put your data out there. You let other people do with it what they want. You can't hang on to it. You can't protect it. it's got to go. You know, it's the child that it's time for it to leave home. And we have to allow the reuse of library bibliographic data in a lot of different environments. I can't tell you how many people are working with bibliographic data that are not connected in any way with libraries. There are people, there's a whole group of folks who are creating citation software for themselves. They're in academia. They want to be able to do something better than EndNote. They have no clue as to how library data might help them out. Open Library, they've never seen library data before. When I first started consulting with them, I decided I have to go very slow. The first thing I had to do was say, you know, a book can have more than one author. So we need to get our data out there because there's people who want to use it, and we have to, of course, get it to the user. So let me tell you a few things that are happening. One, of course, I mentioned RDA, Resource Description and Access. This is started to be AACR 3. It's been evolving, and there is an attempt to make the data reusable. I mean, I feel sorry for these people because they're in a real tug between what they see as being the possibly sort of more modern world and the fact that, you know, there is this whole 150 years of library cataloging history. This is an important project going on. It's not easy to follow it, but you know, if you see a summary of something, follow it. There is the Bibliographic Future report. I wasn't actually on the committee. How many people have read the report from the? Okay, so I have to apologize to you. I wrote the report. I was hired at the end because they realized they wouldn't get it written if they didn't hire someone to do it. And I do actually spend most of my time as a consultant writing reports that you couldn't pay me to read. And that's one of them. But what is important about this is it does talk about needing to make a change to our data, to move our data to the web, to webify our data, to open it up more. So that is in this report, so that concept has gone out into the world. And then there's an important project going on, I think it's important, which is the Dublin Core RDA Task Force. There was an agreement made at a period of time, actually about 1 year ago, that folks from Dublin Core who are very tech savvy, who've done work with the World Wide Web Consortium, but don't really have library chops, would work together with the library folks to try to come up with a new way to define library data. And it's going to have to fit into this horrendous diagram, but I can tell you that this is a very important diagram, which is that we need a technical infrastructure for our data. And we're not talking about replacing the MARC record. We're talking about an underlying basis of a technical infrastructure that will allow us to create data that can live on the web. And if this interests you, go to my blog, kcoyle.blogspot.com, and I've recently posted a talk I gave to Code4Lib about this, which goes into detail. This is what RDA looks like. This is what we're going to try to create, which is a set of defined vocabularies that will be compatible with web resources. We will publish these vocabularies in what is called a registry that will be able to put out machine actionable code data about each data element. In other words, a way to encourage other people to use our data. So that's just an overview that was very quick. I just wanted you to know that that's out there so that you can go out and look at it. The URLs are here. So I'm supposed to end here. Thank you.